What if the greatest mystery in human history wasn't lost, but buried on purpose? Before we dive into the depths, I want to give a thank you to Ilwyn, eventually, and so many others who suggested this story idea. Your creativity and enthusiasm make these videos possible. If you have ideas for future stories, please leave them in the comments below. I read every single one. Now let's descend into a mystery that spans millennia, where ancient secrets and modern conspiracies collide beneath 3 miles of dark Atlantic water. Act 1. The Discovery. The submersible's floodlights cut through the darkness like surgical blades, illuminating particles of marine snow that drifted past the reinforced viewing port. Maya Wren pressed her face closer to the glass, her breath fogging the surface as she watched the magnetometer reading spike again. "That's the 4th anomaly in 20 minutes, she murmured, her fingers flying across the laptop keyboard mounted to her workstation. The cramped interior of the research vessel, Meridian hummed with the steady thrum of engines and the occasional ping of the sonar array. "Could be ferrous deposits," offered James Park, her graduate assistant, his Korean accent still thick despite 5 years at Woods Hole. He adjusted his glasses and leaned over her shoulder to study the screen. "The mid-Atlantic ridge is volcanically active. Plenty of iron-rich basalt down there." Maya shook her head, her dark curls escaping from the loose bun she'd tied that morning. At 36, she'd been mapping oceanic magnetic fields for over a decade, and she knew the difference between geological noise and genuine anomaly. This was different. This was organised. "Basalt doesn't form perfect right angles, James." She pulled up the 3-dimensional rendering of the seafloor they'd been building for the past 6 weeks. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration had funded this expedition to study geomagnetic fluctuations along the Azores sector of the mid-Atlantic ridge. Routine science, or so they'd thought. But 3 days ago, their multi-beam sonar had detected something that made Maya's academic instincts scream. Beneath 400 metres of volcanic sediment, approximately 800 nautical miles west of the Portuguese coast, something massive was hiding. The rendering rotated on her screen. A rectilinear structure nearly 2 kilometres across, composed of what appeared to be 3 concentric rings connected by radial pathways. The magnetic signature was unlike anything in the geological record, consistent with worked stone or metal, not natural formation. "What's the depth?" asked Captain Torres from the bridge above, his voice crackling through the intercom. 2,800 metres, Maya replied, "right at the edge of the abyssal plain." "And you're certain this isn't a shipwreck? Maybe a World War II convoy?" Maya zoomed in on one section of the structure. "Captain, this thing predates steel shipping by a considerable margin. Look at the sediment stratification. We're looking at burial that occurred at least 12,000 years ago, possibly more. Whatever this is, it's been down there since the last ice age." Silence filled the intercom. Even Torres, who'd spent 40 years at sea and thought he'd seen everything, had no response to that. James broke the quiet. "Should we notify NOAA?" "Already done," Maya said, typing the final commands to upload their findings to the shared US-European Union oceanographic database. "Full data set, images, coordinates, everything's going to the archive server now." She hit enter and leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. This was why she'd become an oceanographer. Not for the grants or the conferences, but for moments like this, when the ocean revealed secrets it had kept for millennia. The upload completed. Maya watched the confirmation dialogue appear on her screen. Data successfully transmitted to NOAA archive server. Reference code AZ-MAR-2025-0847. "Coffee?" James offered, holding up the thermal carafe. God, yes. He poured her a cup of the thick black liquid that barely qualified as coffee, but had become essential fuel during their long shifts. Maya wrapped her hands around the warm mug and returned her attention to the sonar display, watching the seafloor scroll past as Meridian continued its survey pattern. Then her screen went black. "What the—" Maya tapped several keys. Nothing. She checked the power supply. Green light. The computer was running, but her access had been cut. James, are you seeing this? He checked his own terminal. I've got nothing. The whole network just locked me out. Maya tried her administrative password. Access denied. She tried her backup credentials. Access denied. She attempted to reconnect to the NOAA server. Your credentials have been revoked. Contact system administrator. That's impossible, she breathed. I uploaded the data 15 minutes ago. You can't revoke research credentials without a formal review, and that takes weeks. Captain Torres's voice came through the intercom, tight with tension. Wren, I'm getting a priority communication from NOAA headquarters. They're ordering us to cease all surveying operations in this sector immediately and return to port. What? Why? They didn't say. But the order came with a national security classification tag. Maya's hands went cold despite the warm coffee mug. National security? For geological research? Captain, request clarification. We're in international waters conducting civilian scientific research funded by US taxpayer money. They can't just... The order is non-negotiable, Wren. We turn around now, or we lose our research license. I'm sorry. The intercom clicked off. Maya stared at her blank screen, her mind racing. She'd uploaded complete data to the server. Coordinates, sonar imagery, magnetic readings, everything. And within minutes, her access had been revoked, and their expedition terminated. Someone didn't want them looking at what was down there. James set down his coffee cup carefully. What do we do? Maya opened her laptop, her personal device not connected to the ship's network. Before uploading to NOAA, she'd made a habit of backing up all her research to an encrypted cloud drive. A habit born from a graduate school disaster when a server crash had destroyed 6 months of thesis work. She accessed the drive. The files were still there. All of them. We find out what we discovered, she said quietly, and we find out why someone wants it buried. Act 2. The Black Archive. The coffee shop in Woods Hole, Massachusetts was nearly empty at 3 p.m. Maya sat in a corner booth, her laptop open but her attention focused on the door. She'd been waiting for 20 minutes, and with each passing moment she wondered if this was a mistake. The email had arrived 2 days after Meridian returned to port. No subject line, sent from an anonymous encrypted address. I worked on something called Project Delphi in the 1970s. I know what you found. We need to talk. Come alone. Below that was a time, a location, and a warning. Delete this message after reading. Maya had almost ignored it. She was a scientist, not a conspiracy theorist. But her credentials were still revoked. NOAA had offered no explanation beyond administrative review. Her calls to supervisors went unreturned, and when she tried to discuss her findings with colleagues, she'd been met with uncomfortable silence and sudden excuses to end conversations. Someone was actively suppressing her research. The door chimed. An elderly man entered, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body no longer obeyed as quickly as his mind commanded. He was perhaps 75, with close-cropped white hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent years at sea. His eyes swept the coffee shop with the methodical assessment of a man trained to notice threats. Those eyes found Maya. He nodded slightly and approached her booth. "You're Wren," he said. It wasn't a question. "And you are?" "Thomas Calloway, Commander US Navy, retired." He slid into the booth across from her, moving with surprising grace despite his age. "I spent 30 years in naval intelligence and submarine operations. The last 5 of those were dedicated to Project Delphi." Maya studied him. He wore a simple windbreaker and khakis, nothing to indicate his military background. But something in his posture, the way he held himself, suggested he was telling the truth. "What was Project Delphi?" she asked. Calloway glanced around the coffee shop. Satisfied they weren't being observed, he pulled a weathered manila folder from inside his jacket and placed it on the table. Officially, deep ocean surveillance, tracking Soviet submarine movements during the Cold War. We deployed a network of hydrophones across the Atlantic, listening for propeller signatures and reactor signatures, and unofficially, his expression darkened. We were looking for architectural anomalies, structures on the seafloor that couldn't be explained by natural geology. Maya felt her pulse quicken. Why? Because we'd found them before. Calloway opened the folder. Inside were yellowed photographs and documents marked with classification stamps, most of them reading Top Secret or Classified, Mare 12. In 1968, a Navy bathyscaphe conducting deep ocean surveys off the coast of Morocco detected what the crew described as Cyclopean masonry at a depth of 4,000 metres, massive blocks of worked stone arranged in geometric patterns. He slid one photograph across the table. It was grainy and water-damaged, but Meyer could make out angular shapes in the murky underwater gloom, too regular to be natural, too massive to be modern construction. The Navy classified the findings immediately, Calloway continued, but certain people in the intelligence community became very interested. If there were prehistoric structures on the ocean floor, what else might be down there? What technology? What knowledge? So they created Project Delphi to search for more, Meyer said. Exactly. We spent 5 years mapping the Atlantic seafloor with sonar arrays far more sophisticated than anything available to civilian researchers. We found dozens of anomalies. Most turned out to be shipwrecks or geological formations that looked artificial but weren't. But some... He trailed off, his gaze distant. Some were real, Meyer finished. Calloway nodded slowly. In 1977, we detected a massive structure near the mid-Atlantic ridge. The sonar returns were unlike anything we'd seen before. Concentric rings, radial pathways, electromagnetic signatures that shouldn't exist underwater. It matched descriptions from Plato's account of Atlantis with disturbing precision. Meyer's academic skepticism warred with the evidence before her. She'd spent her career dealing with facts, with measurable data. Ancient Atlantis was myth, not science. But the sonar data on her laptop told a different story. "What happened?" she asked. Calloway's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out another document. "We sent a deep-sea expedition to investigate. The submarine Triton II descended to the coordinates on July 12, 1977. 6 crew members, including our best deep-sea specialist and a geologist from MIT. And they went silent 18 hours into the dive. No distress call, no emergency beacon, just silence. We sent recovery vessels, but they found nothing. No wreckage, no debris. The Triton II simply vanished." Meyer studied the document he'd placed before her. It was a mission report, heavily redacted, but certain phrases were still visible. Unprecedented electromagnetic interference. Structural composition inconsistent with known materials. Recommend immediate termination of Project Delphi. The project was shut down within a month, Calloway said. All data was classified under a new designation, Mare 12. That's the highest level of classification in naval intelligence. Higher than nuclear submarine specifications, higher than strategic weapons data. Everything related to Delphi was buried, and everyone involved was reassigned with non-disclosure agreements that would land us in military prison if we talked. "So why are you talking now?" He met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her chest tighten. Fear, but also resignation. "Because I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I've got maybe 3 months left. And because I've watched the monitoring data for 50 years, waiting to see if anyone would rediscover what we found." "There's been monitoring?" Meyer asked sharply. "Ongoing surveillance of these sites?" "Of course." The project ended, but the interest didn't. Various agencies have maintained deep ocean sensors throughout the Atlantic. When your data upload hit the NOAA servers, it triggered automated alerts in at least 3 different intelligence databases. That explained the immediate lockdown. Her discovery hadn't just been noticed, it had been anticipated. "Commander Calloway, what exactly do you think is down there?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, seagulls cried as they wheeled above the harbour. The coffee shop's espresso machine hissed and steamed. "I don't think anything," he said finally. "I know, I've seen the classified analyses, the materials tests, the archaeological assessments that were conducted before everything was locked down. What's beneath that sediment isn't just ruins, Meyer. It's a containment facility." "Containing what?" That's the question that got 6 people killed in 1977. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a small USB drive. These are the original Delphi coordinates for the primary site. They're approximately 40 nautical miles from where you conducted your survey. You found one of the outer structures. The main complex is deeper, more heavily buried. Maya took the drive, her fingers closing around the small piece of plastic and metal that seemed to weigh far more than it should. What am I supposed to do with this? That's up to you. But understand that the moment you access those coordinates, you'll be placing yourself in considerable danger. The people who manage Mare 12 have unlimited resources and absolutely no oversight. They've maintained this secret for half a century. They won't let a civilian oceanographer expose it now. He stood slowly, buttoning his windbreaker. Commander, wait. I've told you everything I can. The rest is on that drive. Delete our correspondence, destroy any evidence that we met. And Maya... He paused at the edge of the booth. If you do decide to pursue this, don't use official channels. Don't trust anyone in government or academia. And for God's sake, don't tell anyone where you're going. He walked toward the door, his gait stiff but purposeful. Commander Calloway, Maya called after him. He turned. Why give this to me? Why not take it to the press or leak it online? A sad smile crossed his weathered face. Because you're a scientist. You'll need proof before you believe it. And if you find that proof, you'll know how to interpret it in ways I never could. Just be careful. Some discoveries aren't meant to be made. Then he was gone, disappearing into the grey afternoon. Maya sat alone in the booth, the USB drive burning in her palm. Every rational instinct told her to destroy it, to forget this conversation, to file a grievance with NOAA and wait for the bureaucratic wheels to turn. But she'd seen the sonar data. She'd watched her credentials evaporate within minutes of uploading her research. She'd felt the wrongness of it all, the sense that something far larger than scientific protocol was at play. She inserted the USB drive into her laptop. The files were encrypted, but Calloway had included the password in the file name. Triton 77. Maya typed it in and held her breath. The drive contained dozens of files, sonar maps, bathymetric surveys, electromagnetic spectrum analyses, and dozens of photographs. She opened the images folder. The first photo made her breath catch. It showed a sonar composite of the seafloor, but the resolution was far beyond anything available to her expedition. And there, rendered in stunning detail, were the 3 concentric rings she'd detected. But now she could see they were part of a much larger complex. Radial pathways connected the rings like spokes on a wheel. Massive structures rose from the seafloor, their geometry too precise to be natural. And at the centre of it all was something that made her academic skepticism crumble entirely. A pyramid. Not stepped like Mayan construction or smooth like Egyptian. This was something else entirely. Obsidian black, perfectly symmetrical, rising nearly 300 metres from the ocean floor. The image was stamped with a date, June 1977, 1 month before the Triton II disappeared. Maya's hand shook as she opened the next file. It was a geological analysis, written in dense technical language, but certain passages had been highlighted. Composition inconsistent with terrestrial igneous formations. Isotopic analysis suggests artificial vitrification process. Presence of manufactured nanostructures within crystalline matrix. Electromagnetic properties indicate active power source, despite 12,000-year burial. Active power source. Something down there was still functioning after 12 millennia underwater. The next file was a memo from the project director to the Secretary of the Navy. Project Delphi has identified a structure of potentially non-terrestrial origin. Recommend immediate containment protocols and suspension of all deep ocean research in affected sectors. Further investigation poses unacceptable risk to national security and possibly global stability. Non-terrestrial origin. Maya closed the laptop, her mind reeling. This couldn't be real. This was the territory of the late-night radio shows and conspiracy theory websites, not legitimate science. But the data was real. The sonar returns were real. And Commander Calloway's fear had been very, very real. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Commander Thomas Calloway was found dead this morning. Boating accident off Cape Cod. My condolences. Stop asking questions. Maya stared at the message, her hands trembling. Calloway had met with her 3 hours ago. He'd been fine, dying of cancer, yes, but very much alive. A boating accident, within hours of giving her classified information. She deleted the message and pulled the USB drive from her laptop. Then she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out what was buried beneath the Atlantic, and she was going to find out why people were willing to kill to keep it secret. Act 3. The Descent. Finding a submersible proved easier than Maya expected. The hard part was finding one whose owner wouldn't ask too many questions. She found both in Leo Castellano, a 42-year-old marine engineer who'd spent 15 years designing deep-sea equipment for oil companies before an ethical dispute led him to quit and start his own oceanographic equipment rental business. He operated out of a converted warehouse in Ponta Delgada, in the Azores, and his website advertised no corporate bureaucracy, no red tape, just good equipment and reasonable rates. Maya had flown to the Azores using her savings and rented a small boat under a false name. When she approached Leo with her proposal, a privately funded deep-sea dive to investigate geological formations, he'd been sceptical until she showed him the sonar data. "This is real?" he'd asked, studying the images on her laptop. "As real as anything I've ever measured." He'd studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes assessing. "You're that oceanographer, aren't you? The one whose research credentials got pulled. I saw the talk on the forums." Maya's stomach sank. "I can explain." "No need. I left petroleum engineering because they kept ordering me to bury inconvenient data about environmental damage. I recognise a cover-up when I see one." He'd grinned. "When do we leave?" Now, 3 days later, Maya stood on the deck of Leo's research vessel Prometheus, watching as his crew prepared the submersible Orpheus for deployment. The submarine was a marvel of engineering, a titanium sphere capable of reaching depths of 6,000 metres, equipped with high-definition cameras, manipulator arms, and enough life support for 72 hours. "Final systems check complete," Leo announced, emerging from the sub's access hatch. "All green across the board. Weather window looks good for the next 8 hours." Maya nodded, trying to calm the nervous energy thrumming through her veins. She'd done dozens of submersible dives in her career, but never one like this. Never one that might reveal evidence of a pre-Ice Age civilization. Or worse, evidence that someone had been killing to keep that civilization hidden. "You're sure about this?" Leo asked quietly. "Once we're down there, we're committed. No abort unless it's a life-threatening emergency." "I'm sure." They climbed into the submersible together, squeezing through the narrow hatch into the cramped interior. The sphere was barely 2 meters across, packed with instruments, life support systems and supplies. Maya settled into one of the 2 seats and began checking the camera systems while Leo ran through the pre-dive checklist. "Surface crew, this is Orpheus," Leo spoke into the comm system. "Ready for deployment." "Copy, Orpheus. You're cleared for dive. Good luck down there." The crane activated with a mechanical whine. The submersible lifted off the deck, swung out over the ocean, and began its descent toward the dark Atlantic waters. The moment they hit the surface, the world transformed. Sunlight filtered through the water in shifting columns of blue-green light. Fish scattered from the descending submersible. Maya watched the depth gauge climb 10 meters, 20, 50. "Setting ballast for descent," Leo announced. "Target depth 2,900 meters. Estimated descent time 90 minutes. The submersible's motors engaged with a low hum, and they began to sink faster. The sunlight faded gradually, shifting from brilliant blue to deep azure to purple-black. At 200 meters they entered the twilight zone, where only the faintest traces of surface light penetrated. At 500 meters the darkness became total. Leo activated the exterior floods, and suddenly they were in a bubble of light surrounded by infinite black. Particles of organic matter drifted past like snow, marine snow, the constant rain of dead plankton and fish scales and fecal pellets that fed the deep ocean's ecosystem. "Depth 1,000 meters, Leo reported. "All systems nominal. How are you doing?" "Good," Maya lied. The darkness pressed against the viewing port like a physical thing. She forced herself to focus on the instruments, on the sonar display that showed the seafloor still far below. They descended in silence, the only sounds the hum of the motors and the occasional ping of the active sonar. The pressure gauge climbed steadily. Outside, the water pressure was now over 100 atmospheres, enough to crush an unprotected human instantly. Depth 2,000 meters, Leo said, entering the abyssal zone. The temperature inside the sphere had dropped noticeably despite the heaters. Maya's breath formed small clouds of vapour. She checked the magnetometer, already detecting the anomalies that had first drawn her attention. "I'm getting readings," she said. "Electromagnetic signature increasing, bearing 235 degrees. Leo adjusted their course slightly. The sonar showed the seafloor rising to meet them as they followed the slope of the mid-Atlantic ridge. Depth 2,500 meters, bottom coming up fast. Maya activated the HD cameras, their feeds appearing on the monitors mounted throughout the sphere. The lights illuminated swirling clouds of sediment kicked up by their descent. 2,800 meters, levelling off. The submersible's descent slowed, and they hovered 10 meters above the seafloor. Leo activated the lateral thrusters, and they began moving forward at a crawl, following the coordinates from Callaway's USB drive. The seafloor was a landscape of volcanic rock and sediment, dotted with the occasional deep-sea creature, rat-tailed fish with bioluminescent lures, spider crabs picking through the mud, ghostly white anemones waving in the current. Then the lights caught something that didn't belong. "Stop," Maya breathed. Leo killed the thrusters immediately. They drifted forward on momentum, the lights sweeping across what Maya had spotted. It was a wall, not a rock formation, not a coral reef. A wall, black as obsidian, rising from the sediment in a perfectly straight line that extended beyond the reach of their lights in both directions. "Mother of God," Leo whispered. Maya guided one of the external cameras closer. The wall surface was smooth, almost glassy, with a texture that suggested it had been melted rather than carved. And there, barely visible beneath a thin layer of biological film, were markings. "Are those inscriptions?" Leo asked. Maya leaned closer to the monitor. The markings were geometric, circles, spirals, and linear patterns that seemed to repeat at regular intervals, and among them, symbols that made her academic certainty crumble entirely. A double helix, the universal symbol for DNA, rendered in stone 12,000 years before Watson and Crick. "This shouldn't be possible," she said, "but it is." Leo was already manoeuvring the sub along the wall's length. "We're seeing it right now." They followed the wall for nearly a kilometre, the massive structure curving gradually. Maya realised they were travelling along the outer ring of the concentric circles she detected with sonar. The wall rose at least 30 metres from the seafloor, disappearing into the sediment above. There, Leo pointed, an opening. A gap in the wall, too regular to be damage, clearly intentional, an entrance. "Should we go through?" he asked. Maya checked the electromagnetic readings. They were spiking dramatically, the frequency patterns unlike anything in her database of geological phenomena. "Yes," she said, "but carefully." Leo guided Orpheus through the opening. On the other side, the seafloor dropped away into a vast circular basin, and at its centre. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The pyramid, just like in Callaway's photographs, but seeing it in person was entirely different. It rose from the basin floor in perfect geometric precision, each face meeting at precise angles, the entire structure glowing with a faint blue-green bioluminescence that had nothing to do with marine life. "That's not biological," Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's electromagnetic radiation. The structure itself is generating light." "After 12,000 years underwater," Maya added. "Whatever technology built this, it's still active." They descended into the basin, circling the pyramid slowly. It was massive. The base alone had to be nearly half a kilometre across. The surface was the same obsidian-like material as the walls, but smoother, more refined. And across every face were inscriptions, thousands of them, covering the entire structure in a dense lattice of symbols and diagrams. Maya photographed everything, her cameras clicking constantly. The symbols included mathematical equations, astronomical charts showing planetary orbits, and again, repeatedly, that double helix pattern intertwined with stellar coordinates. It's a map, she realised, or a message. These aren't just decorations, they're communicating something. What's that? Leo pointed to the pyramid's apex. Something protruded from the structure's peak, a crystalline formation that pulsed with the same blue-green light, but brighter, more concentrated. Can we get closer? Maya asked. Leo engaged the thrusters, and they rose toward the apex. As they approached, Maya's instruments went haywire. The electromagnetic readings spiked off the scale. Static filled the comm system. Even the submersible's lights flickered. We're getting interference, Leo reported, his voice tense. The pyramid's output is playing hell with our electronics. Just a little closer. They ascended until they were level with the crystal formation. It was beautiful. A perfectly symmetrical structure of what looked like quartz, or diamond, easily 3 meters tall, pulsing with internal light like a heartbeat. And through that light, Maya could see something inside. Leo, can you position one of the cameras for a better angle? He manoeuvred the external camera arm, bringing it within a meter of the crystal. Maya zoomed in, enhancing the image, filtering out the glare. Inside the crystal was a chamber, and inside that chamber, suspended in some kind of translucent medium, were objects, not artifacts, not tools, organisms. They looked almost like jellyfish, but the symmetry was too perfect, the structure too organised. Tendrils extended from a central nucleus in precise geometric patterns. The nucleus itself glowed with the same blue-green light, and within it, Maya could see structures that resembled cells, but cells far more complex than anything in Earth's evolutionary history. "Those are alive," she whispered. "That's impossible," Leo said. "Nothing could survive that long in—" The organisms moved, not drifting with current. There was no current inside the crystal. This was purposeful movement, coordinated. The tendrils extended and contracted in synchronous patterns, like neurons firing in a brain. "They're not preserved," Maya said, her voice shaking. "They're active, functioning. These things have been alive for 12,000 years. "That violates every principle of biology," Leo said. "Nothing lives that long, nothing. Unless they weren't entirely biological," Maya thought. The DNA helix symbols, the cellular complexity, the electromagnetic signatures. What if these organisms were biotechnological? Part biology, part machine. One of the organisms pressed against the inside of the crystal, its tendrils spreading across the surface. Maya could swear it was looking at them, examining them the way they were examining it. "We need to document this," she said, her scientific instincts overriding her growing unease. "Full spectrum analysis, tissue samples, if we can manage—" The pyramid's light pulsed brighter. The electromagnetic readings doubled, tripled. "Maya, we need to back off," Leo warned. "The systems are overloading." "Just another minute." A sound filled the submersible, not through the comm system, but through the hull itself. A deep, resonant tone that vibrated through Maya's bones. It reminded her of whale song, but lower, more complex, and beneath it, patterns, rhythms, almost like language. "What is that?" Leo asked. Maya checked her acoustic sensors. The sound wasn't random noise, it was structured, repeating in complex sequences. Someone, something, was transmitting. And then, on the sonar display, Maya saw something that made her blood turn to ice. The sediment around the pyramid was moving, shifting, rising in coordinated patterns that couldn't be natural. "The pyramid's waking up," she breathed. "What?" "The electromagnetic pulses. They're activating something buried in the sediment. Look at the sonar. There are more structures down there, all connected to the pyramid, and they're all starting to generate the same frequencies." The acoustic signal intensified. The water around them began to glow with bioluminescent plankton, responding to the pyramid's electromagnetic output. The entire basin was coming alive. "We're leaving," Leo said firmly. "Now." He engaged the ballast system, and Orpheus began to rise. Maya kept her cameras trained on the pyramid, recording everything, even as the structure receded below them. The organisms inside the crystal pressed against its surface, their tendrils spreading wider, moving faster, almost desperately. Then Maya saw something that would haunt her nightmares for months to come. A crack appeared in the crystal, just a hairline fracture, barely visible, but it was there. And as they watched, it spread, slowly, inevitably. "The containment is failing," Maya said. "Whatever that pyramid was built to hold, it's breaking free." They cleared the basin's edge and shot toward the surface, the submersible's motors straining. Behind them, the acoustic signal continued, growing louder, more complex, more urgent. Maya looked back one last time. Through the darkness she could see the pyramid's glow intensifying, pulsing in rhythmic patterns that spread across the entire structure like veins of light. The organisms weren't just moving now, they were growing, extending tendrils beyond the crystal's boundaries into the surrounding water, and on the sonar Maya saw the other structures buried in the sediment beginning to break through, rising, activating. Whatever Atlantis had been built to contain, whatever ancient civilization had buried it beneath volcanic sediment and 3 miles of ocean, was waking up after 12,000 years, and humanity had no idea what was coming. Act 4. The Suppression. They surfaced 6 hours later, exhausted and terrified. The moment Orpheus broke the surface, Leo activated the emergency beacon, a decision they both regretted within the hour. The NATO frigate appeared on the horizon before they had even finished transferring their data to the surface vessel. Maya watched through binoculars as the warship approached with deliberate speed, its profile unmistakable even at distance. "That's a patrol vessel," Leo said, his voice tight. "Armed. What the hell is NATO doing out here?" "Looking for us," Maya replied quietly. The frigate pulled alongside Prometheus, dwarfing Leo's smaller research vessel. Armed sailors lined the rails. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker in English, Portuguese and French. "This is NATO research vessel integrity. You're operating in a restricted maritime zone. Stand by for boarding." "Restricted?" Leo looked at Maya. "We check the maritime charts." "This is open ocean, international waters." "It wasn't restricted 6 hours ago," Maya said. "It is now." The boarding party came aboard with professional efficiency. A dozen sailors and 3 men in civilian clothing who moved with the precise coordination of military special forces. One of them, a tall man in his 50s with greying temples and cold blue eyes, approached Maya directly. "I'm Commander Peterson, NATO Maritime Research Division," he said, showing credentials that Maya didn't recognise. "You've been conducting unauthorised research in protected waters." "This is international ocean," Leo protested. "You can't just..." "Under Article 87 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, we have authority to restrict access to areas of environmental sensitivity," Peterson interrupted smoothly. "A massive gas seep has been detected in this sector. Highly toxic, potentially explosive. We're evacuating all vessels for their safety." "That's convenient," Maya said. "How long has this gas seep been active?" Peterson's expression didn't change. "Long enough. Now we'll need to confiscate all recording equipment and data storage devices. Standard contamination protocol." "Contamination?" Leo said incredulously. "From what?" "Sulfur compounds can corrupt electronic media," Peterson said smoothly. "We're doing you a favour." Within minutes, armed sailors were removing every hard drive, camera and recording device from both vessels. Maya watched helplessly as they carried away terabytes of data. The pyramid, the organisms, the inscriptions, everything. "This is illegal seizure," she protested. Peterson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "You dove to coordinates from a classified military project. You documented structures covered by international security protocols that predate your birth. You have no legal standing here, and if you push this, you'll discover exactly how far outside the law you really are. He stepped back, his professional smile returning. For your safety, you'll be escorted to port immediately. Any attempt to return to this sector will result in arrest. Are we clear? Maya said nothing. Peterson took her silence as agreement and returned to the frigate. By sunset, they were back in Ponta Delgada, their equipment gone, their data seized. Leo was furious. Maya was terrified, because she knew they'd seen something they weren't supposed to see. And people who saw such things had a tendency to disappear. Act 5. The Ancient Connection. 3 days later, Maya's university position was terminated. The official reason: fabrication of research data and violation of ethical research protocols. Her protest fell on deaf ears. Every colleague she'd trusted suddenly refused to return her calls. She was being erased. That night, as she packed her office, an email arrived from an anonymous account. The subject line read, "You opened a vault that was meant to stay closed. Study the Svalbard files." Svalbard, the Norwegian archipelago known primarily for its global seed vault, a massive underground facility designed to preserve crop diversity in case of global catastrophe. Maya spent the next week researching, following digital breadcrumbs through leaked documents, conspiracy forums, and archived UN reports. What she found was disturbing. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault had an annex, an older section, built in the 1980s, that predated the official vault by decades. According to leaked architectural plans, this section wasn't designed for seeds. It was designed for biological samples. Maya used the last of her savings to fly to Longyearbyen, Svalbard's main settlement. The midnight sun hung above the horizon, casting everything in perpetual twilight. She hired a local guide named Eric, telling him she was a journalist researching climate data. He took her to the vault's location, a massive entrance built into the mountainside, its triangular concrete portal iconic and foreboding. "The seed vault is closed to visitors," Eric said, "but there are maintenance tunnels. Used to be coal mines before they built the vault. Can you show me?" Eric studied her for a long moment. "You're not a journalist." "No. This is dangerous, whatever you're doing." "I know." He nodded slowly. "There's a tunnel entrance 3 kilometers north. Connects to the old sections. I can get you inside, but after that you're on your own." The tunnel was cramped and dark, carved through permafrost that gleamed in Maya's headlamp. They walked for nearly an hour before Eric stopped at a sealed metal door. "This is as far as I go," he said, producing a key ring. "This door hasn't been opened in 15 years, according to the maintenance logs. Whatever you find in there, you didn't get it from me." Maya thanked him, and waited until his footsteps faded before opening the door. Beyond was a concrete corridor lit by emergency lighting. The air was cold enough that her breath crystallized immediately. She walked carefully, her footsteps echoing. The corridor opened into a vault. Not the modern seed storage, but something older, industrial. The walls were lined with sealed containers, each marked with hazard symbols and classification codes. And there, on several containers, was the symbol she'd seen on the pyramid. The double helix intertwined with stellar coordinates. Maya's hands shook as she approached one of the containers. It was sealed with multiple locks, but years of permafrost had made the metal brittle. She used a crowbar from the maintenance area and pried it open. Inside were dozens of smaller containment vessels, each filled with luminescent fluid. And floating in that fluid were samples, tissue samples, cellular cultures, all glowing with the same blue-green light she'd seen in the pyramid. A dossier lay in the container, sealed in waterproof plastic. Maya pulled it out and opened it. The title page read, "Delphi Continuation Project, Genomic Preservation Protocol." She read through the document with growing horror. The organisms from the pyramid weren't alien. They were human-made, or rather made by whatever civilization had existed before the last ice age. a civilization that had mastered biotechnology to the point of creating self-replicating, self-sustaining biological machines. The dossier explained that when Project Delphi discovered the pyramid in 1977, they'd recovered samples. Analysis revealed that the organisms contained human DNA fragments, but modified, enhanced, merged with technology at the molecular level. The ancient civilization hadn't been destroyed, they'd transcended, merging with their own creations. And when they realised what they'd become, biological entities that could theoretically live forever, replicate endlessly, remake the world in their image, they'd made a terrible choice. They'd buried themselves, imprisoned their own evolution beneath the ocean floor, hoping that future civilizations would be wiser, that humanity wouldn't make the same mistakes. The final page of the dossier was a mission report dated September 1977, 1 month after the Triton II disappeared. Containment breach imminent. The organisms are demonstrating adaptive capabilities beyond initial assessments. Recommend tectonic burial via directed seismic detonation. Maintain monitoring protocols. Under no circumstances should the primary containment structure be disturbed. Someone had written in the margin, in faded ink, they didn't die. They're waiting. Maya photographed every page with her phone, her hands trembling. This was the proof. This was what they'd been hiding. Atlantis wasn't a myth. It was a warning. Act 6. The Truth Beneath. Maya leaked everything online. The photos from Svalbard, the sonar data she'd backed up to her cloud drive, even the coordinates from Commander Calloway's USB drive. She posted it all to encrypted forums, sent it to investigative journalists, uploaded it to document sharing sites. The response was exactly what she expected. Mainstream media ignored it. Academics dismissed it as elaborate fraud, and within hours most of the uploads were removed for violating community guidelines. But some sites kept it up. Some people believed. And in the comments and private messages, Maya found others. Whistleblowers from various agencies, former military personnel, scientists who'd encountered similar suppressions. A picture began to emerge. The world's governments hadn't just continued Project Delphi, they'd expanded it. Hidden under climate monitoring programs, deep ocean research initiatives and environmental surveys, a global network had been watching the Atlantic for 50 years, watching and waiting for the containment to fail, because it was failing. Maya's dive had accelerated the process, but geological surveys showed it had been deteriorating for decades. The pyramid's electromagnetic output had been increasing annually. Seismic activity around the site was intensifying. The vault was waking up just as the ancient builders had feared. 2 weeks after her leak, Maya received a message from an encrypted account. It contained a single file, real-time seismic data from the mid-Atlantic ridge. The readings showed a pattern, regular pulses repeating every 47 minutes, emanating from the exact coordinates of the pyramid, and the pattern matched perfectly with the double helix inscription she'd photographed. The organisms weren't just alive, they were transmitting, broadcasting their genetic code into the surrounding ocean, into the global current systems, potentially into the atmosphere itself. The ancient civilization's final gift, or curse, was spreading. Maya sat in her tiny apartment, watching the seismic data scroll across her laptop screen. She'd lost everything pursuing this truth. Her career, her reputation, her safety. Commander Calloway was dead. Others who'd helped her had disappeared or recanted their statements under mysterious pressure. But the data didn't lie, and the world needed to know. She typed out one final post attaching all the evidence. My name is Maya Wren. I'm an oceanographer who discovered something beneath the Atlantic Ocean that challenges everything we think we know about human history. What I found suggests that Atlantis was real, but not the way we imagined. It wasn't a paradise lost to natural disaster. It was a containment facility, built by an ancient civilization to imprison something they'd created and couldn't control. That containment is failing. and the governments of the world have known about this for 50 years, keeping it secret while they study it, trying to harness it, risking all of humanity in the process. I don't know what happens next, but I know we deserve the truth. We deserve to know what's waking up 3 miles beneath the ocean, because if we don't understand it, we can't prepare for it. The vault is opening, and we're running out of time. She hit send and sat back exhausted. Outside her window, the night sky was clear, stars scattered across the darkness like the inscriptions on the pyramid. Somewhere beneath the Atlantic, ancient biotechnology was pulsing with stolen heartbeats, waiting. Maya put on her headphones and accessed the live feed from a research buoy she'd secretly maintained contact with, one of hundreds monitoring the Atlantic. She listened to the low-frequency hum transmitted through 3 miles of water, converted to audible sound by the buoy's hydrophones. And there, beneath the random noise of ocean currents and marine life, she heard it. A pattern, rhythmic, purposeful, almost musical. The double helix rendered in sound, repeating endlessly, spreading through the global ocean like a whispered secret. The organisms were singing, calling, broadcasting their existence to whatever might be listening. Maya closed her eyes and listened as the ocean itself seemed to whisper through her headphones, the ancient voice of a civilization that had tried to bury its greatest achievement and most terrible mistake. "The vault is waking," she whispered to the empty room, and somewhere beneath the Atlantic, in the crushing darkness 3 miles down, the pyramid pulsed with blue-green light, its crystal apex slowly fracturing, its imprisoned secrets spreading into the water molecule by molecule, cell by cell. Humanity had 12,000 years to prepare for this moment. It wouldn't be enough. The end. Thank you for reading The Tides of Silence. If you enjoyed this story, please share it with others who appreciate science fiction that blends real oceanography with ancient mysteries. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying discoveries are the ones we make about ourselves. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop looking into the deep. Urson's expression didn't change. Long enough. Now we'll need to confiscate all recording equipment and data storage devices. Standard contamination protocol. Contamination? Leo said incredulously. From what? Sulfur compounds can corrupt electronic media, Peterson said smoothly. We're doing you a favour. Within minutes, armed sailors were removing every hard drive, camera and recording device from both vessels. Maya watched helplessly as they carried away terabytes of data. The pyramid, the organisms, the inscriptions, everything. "This is illegal seizure," she protested. Peterson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "You dove to coordinates from a classified military project. You documented structures covered by international security protocols that predate your birth. You have no legal standing here, and if you push this, you'll discover exactly how far outside the law you really are." He stepped back, his professional smile returning. "For your safety, you'll be escorted to port immediately. Any attempt to return to this sector will result in arrest. Are we clear?" Maya said nothing. Peterson took her silence as agreement and returned to the frigate. By sunset, they were back in Ponta Delgada, their equipment gone, their data seized. Leo was furious. Maya was terrified, because she knew they'd seen something they weren't supposed to see, and people who saw such things had a tendency to disappear. The next morning, Maya's university credentials were completely revoked. An email from the Dean of Oceanographic Studies informed her that her position was under review for ethical violations and potential research fraud. Her access to university systems was suspended. Her laboratory was locked. She tried calling colleagues, but most didn't answer. Those who did were polite but distant, as if speaking to her might somehow contaminate them too. By the third day, the message was clear. She was being systematically erased from academic life. That evening, as Maya sat in her hotel room trying to figure out her next move, an email arrived from an anonymous encrypted account. No subject line, just a single sentence. He opened a vault that was meant to stay closed. Study the Svalbard files. Maya stared at the message. Svalbard. The Norwegian archipelago in the Arctic Ocean, famous primarily for one thing, the global seed vault. She spent the next 12 hours researching. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault was a massive underground facility carved into a mountain, designed to preserve crop diversity in case of global catastrophe. It held over 1 million seed samples from around the world, humanity's agricultural insurance policy. But as Maya dug deeper through leaked documents, conspiracy forums and archived United Nations reports, she found references to something else. An older facility. An annex built in the 1980s, before the official seed vault existed. And this older section wasn't designed for seeds. According to fragmentary architectural plans she found on an obscure document-sharing site, the original Svalbard facility had been built to store biological samples. Not plants. Something else entirely. Several of the leaked documents bore a familiar classification, MARE12. Maya made her decision. She used the last of her savings to book a flight to Oslo, then north to Longyearbyen, Svalbard's main settlement. Act 5. The Ancient Connection. The Arctic sun never fully set in summer, casting everything in perpetual twilight. Maya stepped off the small aircraft onto the tarmac at Svalbard Airport, the cold wind cutting through her jacket despite it being June. Longyearbyen was a small town of brightly coloured buildings against a backdrop of snow-covered mountains and glaciers. It felt like the edge of the world, isolated, remote, forgotten by civilization. Perfect for hiding secrets. Maya checked into a small guest house and spent the evening in the common area, nursing coffee and listening to conversations. Most visitors were scientists, climate researchers, or adventure tourists come to see polar bears and glaciers. She struck up a conversation with a weathered man in his 50s who introduced himself as Eric Johansson, a local guide and former coal miner. "The seed vault," he said when she mentioned her interest. "It's closed to visitors, very secure, but there are maintenance tunnels, old coal mine passages that connect to some of the facility's outer sections." "Could someone access those tunnels?" Maya asked carefully. Eric studied her over his coffee cup. "You're not a tourist." "No." "And you're not here for the seeds." "No." He was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward. "My father worked construction when they built the original facility in 1984, before the seed vault. He told me stories about strange equipment they installed. Biological containment systems, cryogenic storage, things that had nothing to do with preserving crops. He signed confidentiality agreements, but before he died, he told me the truth. There's more in that mountain than seeds." Maya felt her pulse quicken. "Can you help me get inside?" Eric considered this. "What you're planning is illegal, trespassing at minimum, possibly violating international security protocols." "I know. And you're going to do it anyway." "I have to." "People are dying to keep these secrets buried. I need to know why." Eric nodded slowly. "There's a tunnel entrance about 3 kilometres north of town. Officially abandoned, but the locks were replaced 5 years ago with very expensive security systems. Someone doesn't want people exploring those old passages." "Can you get me past the security?" He smiled grimly. "I maintained those systems when they were installed. I kept copies of the access codes." 2 hours later, Maya followed Eric through the darkness of an abandoned coal mine. Their headlamps cut narrow beams through the blackness, illuminating walls of ice-veined rock. The temperature was well below freezing, and Maya's breath crystallized in clouds before her face. They walked for nearly an hour, descending deeper into the mountain. Finally, Eric stopped at a heavy steel door set into the rock wall. A modern Tektronic keypad was mounted beside it, incongruous against the ancient stone. "This is as far as I go," Eric said. He entered a 12-digit code and the lock clicked open. "Beyond this door, you're in the facility." There are no cameras in the old sections. They were decommissioned when the new seed vault opened. But if someone is actively monitoring, they'll know the door was opened. How long do I have? 30 minutes before someone could realistically get here from town. Maybe an hour if weather delays them. Don't push your luck. Maya thanked him and waited until his footsteps faded back up the tunnel before pulling the door open. Beyond was a concrete corridor lit by dim emergency lighting. The air was intensely cold, far colder than the mine tunnel. She walked carefully, her footsteps echoing off the walls. The corridor opened into a large vault chamber. The walls were lined with sealed storage containers, each marked with hazard symbols and classification codes that Maya didn't recognise. The containers were old, decades old, their surfaces covered in frost, and there on several containers near the back of the chamber was a symbol that made Maya's heart stop. The double helix intertwined with stellar coordinates, the same symbol from the pyramid. Her hands shook as she approached the containers. They were sealed with multiple locks, but years of permafrost expansion had made the metal brittle. She found a pry bar in a maintenance locker and used it to force open the nearest container. Inside were dozens of smaller vessels, each filled with luminescent fluid. Floating in that fluid were tissue samples, organic material that glowed with the same blue-green bioluminescence she'd seen in the pyramid's crystal chamber. A dossier lay at the bottom of the container, sealed in waterproof plastic. Maya pulled it out with trembling fingers and opened it. The title page read, Project Delphi Continuation, Genomic Preservation Protocol. She began reading, and with each page her understanding of everything shifted. The organisms weren't alien. They weren't even entirely foreign to Earth's evolutionary history. According to the analysis, they contained human DNA fragments, but modified, enhanced, merged with synthetic biological structures at the molecular level. The dossier explained that when Project Delphi discovered the pyramid in 1977, they'd managed to recover samples before the Triton II was lost. Analysis revealed something extraordinary. The organisms represented a form of biotechnology that merged organic and synthetic materials so completely that the distinction became meaningless. They were self-replicating, self-sustaining, capable of adapting to any environment, and they contained genetic information from dozens of species, not just human, but animals, plants, even microorganisms, all woven together in an impossibly complex genomic tapestry. The scientists who studied them concluded that the pyramid wasn't built by an alien civilization. It was built by humans, or rather, by whatever humans had become in a civilization that existed before the last ice age. A civilization advanced enough to master biotechnology at a level that made modern genetic engineering look primitive. But something had gone wrong. Maya found a section marked Containment Rationale. The text was clinical, but the implications were terrifying. Analysis suggests the organisms were designed as a form of biological transcendence, an attempt to merge human consciousness with self-perpetuating biomechanical systems. Initial subjects successfully integrated with the technology, achieving extended lifespans and enhanced capabilities. However, the organisms demonstrated unexpected evolutionary behaviours. They began replicating beyond design parameters. They started rewriting their own genetic code, incorporating DNA from any biological matter they encountered. Within 3 generations, they had diverged so far from their original human template that the designation post-human became inadequate. They were becoming something else entirely. The original civilization made a choice. Rather than allow this runaway evolution to consume the biosphere, they constructed containment facilities. The largest of these, designated Site Alpha in our records, is the structure we discovered in the Atlantic. It was designed not as a city, but as a prison. The ancient builders buried themselves there along with their creations, hoping that future civilizations would be wiser, that humanity would learn from their mistakes. Maya turned to the final page. It was a mission report dated September 17th, 1977. The Triton II expedition has been lost. All crew presumed dead. Final transmissions indicated catastrophic containment breach at Site Alpha. The organisms demonstrated rapid adaptation to deep ocean environment and aggressive behaviour toward human subjects. Emergency protocols activated. Recommendation: tectonic burial via directed seismic detonation. A series of precisely calibrated explosives will trigger undersea landslides, burying Site Alpha under an additional 500 metres of sediment. This should reinforce containment for at least another century. All recovered samples transferred to Svalbard Biological Archive for preservation and study under MARE-12 protocols. Maintain continuous monitoring of Site Alpha. Under no circumstances should the primary containment structure be disturbed. Someone had written in the margin, in faded blue ink, "They didn't die, they're waiting." Another note dated 2003, seismic activity increasing. Containment degradation accelerating faster than models predicted. And a final note from 2019, electromagnetic output from Site Alpha up 47% since 2010. Recommend evacuation protocols for coastal populations within 1,000 kilometres if breach occurs. Maya photographed every page with her phone, her mind reeling. They'd known. For nearly 50 years, governments around the world had known that the containment was failing. They'd been studying the organisms, preserving samples, preparing for what might happen, but they'd told no one. She closed the dossier and looked at the glowing samples in their containers. Beautiful. Terrifying. The product of a civilization that had tried to transcend its biological limitations and instead created something that threatened all life on Earth. A distant sound echoed through the corridor, voices, footsteps. Security was coming faster than Eric had predicted. Maya sealed the container and ran back toward the tunnel entrance. Behind her, she heard shouts, the sound of people entering the vault chamber. She made it to the steel door and slipped through, pulling it closed behind her. Then she ran through the darkness of the coal mine, her headlamp bouncing wildly, Eric's voice calling from ahead, "This way! Hurry!" They emerged into the Arctic twilight 20 minutes later, both breathing hard. Eric led her to a small boat moored at the harbour. "You need to leave Svalbard," he said. "Now. Whatever you found, they'll be looking for you." "I know. Did you get what you needed?" Maya touched her phone in her pocket, feeling the weight of the photographs. "Yes." "Then go. And whatever you do with that information, be careful. Some secrets are buried for good reasons." Act 6. The Truth Beneath. Maya returned to the United States via a circuitous route, Oslo to London to Montreal to Boston, changing her appearance at each stop, paying cash whenever possible. She knew she was likely being tracked, but she hoped the indirect path would buy her time. She needed that time to get the information out. From a cheap hotel in Portland, Maine, Maya uploaded everything. The photographs from Svalbard, the sonar data from the pyramid that she'd backed up to encrypted cloud storage, the coordinates from Commander Calloway's USB drive, Commander Calloway's death notice, documentation of her credential revocation, everything. She posted it to encrypted forums, sent it to investigative journalists at major news outlets, uploaded it to document sharing sites and whistleblower platforms. She created detailed write-ups explaining what she'd found, connecting the dots between Project Delphi, the pyramid, the organisms, and the global cover-up. Then she waited. The response was exactly what she expected, and somehow worse. Mainstream media ignored her completely. Not a single major outlet picked up the story. Academic journals dismissed it as elaborate fraud. The uploaded documents disappeared from most platforms within hours, removed for violating community guidelines or spreading misinformation. A few conspiracy theory websites ran with it, but their coverage was so sensationalized that it actually hurt her credibility. They mixed her genuine evidence with wild speculation about ancient aliens and government mind control, making the entire story seem ridiculous. But some people believed. In encrypted chat rooms and private forums, Maya found others. Former military personnel who'd worked on ocean surveillance projects, Scientists who'd encountered similar suppressions, government contractors who'd seen things they couldn't explain. A picture emerged from these conversations. The world's governments hadn't just continued Project Delphi after 1977, they'd expanded it massively. Hidden under the cover of climate monitoring programs, deep ocean research initiatives and environmental surveys, a vast international network had been watching the Atlantic for 5 decades. Watching and waiting for the containment to fail, because it was failing. The seismic detonations in 1977 had bought time, but not enough. Geological surveys showed the pyramid's electromagnetic output had been increasing steadily since the 1990s. The growth was exponential, doubling every few years. Someone sent Maya a link to real-time seismic monitoring data from the mid-Atlantic ridge. She accessed it through multiple proxy servers, watching the readouts with growing horror. Regular pulses emanated from the exact coordinates of the pyramid. Not random seismic noise, but organised patterns, rhythmic, repeating every 47 minutes, and the pattern matched the double helix inscription she'd photographed. The organisms weren't just alive, they were transmitting, broadcasting their genetic code through vibrations in the Earth's crust, through electromagnetic pulses in the water, potentially into the atmosphere itself through mechanisms Maya didn't fully understand. The ancient civilization's final legacy was spreading, molecule by molecule, cell by cell, into the modern world. Maya spent 3 weeks evading what she was certain was surveillance, moving between cheap hotels, using burner phones, meeting with the few people who believed her in anonymous locations. She documented everything, creating a complete record of her investigation. And then she made a decision. She would stop hiding. She would put her name and face on the record, forcing them to either acknowledge the truth or silence her publicly, something they seemed reluctant to do. From a small apartment she'd rented under a friend's name in Providence, Rhode Island, Maya recorded a video. She explained everything. Her discovery, the NATO interception, Svalbard, the dossier, the organisms, the failing containment. She uploaded it to every platform she could find. Most copies were removed within hours, but some stayed up, and people shared them faster than they could be deleted. The video went viral in certain communities. Not mainstream, major platforms suppressed it too effectively for that, but it spread through alternative media, scientific forums, and among people who'd learned to distrust official narratives. Maya became simultaneously famous and invisible. Famous in certain circles, but completely ignored by mainstream media and academia. It was a strange kind of notoriety. 3 days after her video went public, Maya received a message on her encrypted phone. No words, just a file attachment. It was live data from a deep ocean sensor array, real-time monitoring from the pyramid site. The electromagnetic readings had spiked dramatically. The rhythmic pulses were now occurring every 12 minutes instead of every 47. The intensity had increased by over 300%. Something was happening at the pyramid. Something was accelerating. Maya accessed every monitoring source she could find. Seismic sensors, oceanographic buoys, even amateur radio operators who reported strange low-frequency signals. All of them told the same story. The containment was failing, not gradually but catastrophically. And then the messages started appearing in her encrypted channels. From other scientists, from government whistleblowers, from people inside the monitoring programs. We're detecting organic material in water samples from the Atlantic. DNA fragments matching the Svalbard samples. Coastal sensors are registering bioluminescent blooms along the mid-Atlantic ridge. The patterns are spreading. Emergency meetings at NATO headquarters. Something about evacuation protocols. They're mobilising naval assets to the site. Submarine teams, containment vessels. It's happening. Maya sat in her small apartment surrounded by printouts and laptop screens, watching as humanity's hidden history began to break through the surface. She thought about Commander Calloway, who died to get her this information, about the Triton II crew, lost in 1977, about the ancient civilization that had tried to transcend its limitations, and instead created something that might destroy its descendants 12,000 years later. She opened her laptop and began writing one final post. My name is Maya Wren. I'm an oceanographer who discovered something beneath the Atlantic Ocean that challenges everything we think we know about human history. Atlantis was real. But it wasn't the paradise described in myths. It was a containment facility, a prison built by an ancient civilization to lock away something they'd created and couldn't control. They buried themselves there along with their creation, hoping we would be wiser, that we would learn from their mistakes. But we didn't learn. We found their prison. We studied it in secret. And now the containment is failing. The world's governments have known about this for 50 years. They've kept it classified, kept it hidden, studying the technology while ignoring the danger. And now we're out of time. I don't know what happens next. Maybe the organisms will remain dormant. Maybe the containment will hold for another 1,000 years. Or maybe we're about to face the consequences of our ancestors' hubris and our own. But I know we deserve the truth. We deserve to know what's waking up beneath the ocean. Because if we don't understand it, we can't prepare for it. And if we can't prepare for it, we won't survive it. I'm uploading all my evidence, coordinates, photographs, documents, everything. Share it, study it. Demand answers from your governments. Don't let them keep hiding this. The vault is opening, and we need to be ready. Maya hit send and sat back, exhausted. Outside her window, Providence was waking up. People heading to work, living their ordinary lives, unaware that beneath 3 miles of Atlantic water, ancient biotechnology was pulsing with stolen heartbeats, spreading through the ocean, perhaps already integrating into the planetary ecosystem. She put on her headphones and accessed the live audio feed from a research buoy she'd secretly maintained contact with. The buoy's hydrophones converted underwater sounds to audible frequencies, and there it was, a low-frequency hum, transmitted through thousands of miles of water, not random noise, but organised, rhythmic, almost musical. The double helix rendered in sound, repeating endlessly, spreading through the global ocean like a whispered secret that had waited 12 millennia to be heard. Maya closed her eyes and listened as the ocean sang, the ancient voice of a civilization that had tried to bury its greatest achievement and most terrible mistake. The organisms were calling, broadcasting their existence to whatever might be listening, to each other perhaps, or to something else. Something the ancient builders had feared so much they'd chosen burial over escape. On her laptop screen, seismic sensors recorded new tremors at the pyramid coordinates, not random earthquakes, but patterns, organised patterns that repeated the double helix formation in 3 dimensions. The vault wasn't just opening, it was waking up, becoming active in ways that suggested intelligence, purpose, awareness. Maya thought about the inscription she'd seen on the pyramid's wall, the stellar coordinates, the genetic information, the merger of biology and technology. The ancient civilization hadn't just created organisms, they'd created a message, a warning encoded in DNA and stone and electromagnetic fields. And now that message was being broadcast to the world. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Coast Guard reporting massive bioluminescent bloom 200 miles off the Azores, spreading at approximately 15 knots, composition unknown. Recommend avoiding the area. Another message. Fishing vessels reporting equipment failures in the North Atlantic. All electronic systems, no explanation. Another. Strange readings in Gulf Stream waters. DNA analysis shows sequences that don't match any known organism. It was happening. Slowly, inexorably, the organisms were spreading beyond the containment, adapting to the modern ocean, beginning whatever process the ancient builders had feared. Maya stood and walked to her window, looking out at the ordinary world, people going about their lives, cars on the street, birds in the trees, life continuing as it always had, unaware that everything might be about to change. She didn't know if humanity could survive what was coming. The ancient civilization had been far more advanced. and they'd failed to control their creation. But they'd also left behind a warning, a record, a chance for their descendants to make better choices. Maya returned to her laptop and began writing again. Not another warning, but something else. A detailed analysis of the organism's structure based on the Svalbard files. A guide to understanding the ancient biotechnology. Information that might help humanity survive, if anyone was willing to listen. She worked through the night, documenting everything she knew, everything she'd learned, creating a resource for scientists and researchers who might come after her, for people who would need to understand what they were facing. As dawn broke over Providence, Maya uploaded her work to every platform she could access. Then she encrypted her hard drives, backed everything up to multiple secure locations, and prepared to disappear. They would come for her eventually. But the information was out there now. The truth was spreading faster than they could suppress it. She thought about Commander Calloway's final words. Some discoveries aren't meant to be made. Maybe he was right, but the discovery had been made, the vault was open, and now humanity would have to face the consequences of curiosity that transcended the boundaries of time and wisdom. Maya gathered her belongings and left the apartment. She didn't know where she would go, or how long she could stay ahead of those who wanted her silenced. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The world had changed. Whether anyone acknowledged it or not, whether it made the news or remained hidden in classified files, the fundamental reality of human existence had shifted. We were no longer alone with our own creations. We shared the world now with the creations of our ancestors, creations that had waited 12,000 years for a chance to fulfill their original purpose. And that purpose, written in DNA and stone and electromagnetic pulses, was still unfolding beneath the dark waters of the Atlantic. Epilogue. 6 months later, marine biologists began reporting unusual phenomena in the Atlantic Ocean. Bioluminescent organisms with no clear place in existing taxonomy. Electromagnetic anomalies that disrupted shipping navigation. Strange patterns in water chemistry that couldn't be explained by known processes. Official explanations blamed climate change, industrial pollution, natural variations in ocean currents. But in encrypted forums and private conversations, scientists shared a different story. They showed DNA analyses of the new organisms, sequences that contained fragments of human genetic code mixed with structures that seemed designed rather than evolved. Some claimed the organisms were spreading, adapting, integrating with existing marine ecosystems in ways that suggested intelligence. Others dismissed it all as conspiracy theory and coincidence. Maya Wren disappeared from public view. Some said she'd gone into hiding. Others claimed she'd been silenced by government agents. A few conspiracy theorists insisted she'd never existed at all, that the entire story was disinformation designed to distract from real issues. But in the deep places of the internet, her research continued to circulate. Her photographs of the pyramid, her analysis of the ancient biotechnology, her warnings about what might be coming. And in the Atlantic Ocean, 3 miles down in crushing darkness and cold, the pyramid continued to pulse with blue-green light. The crystal at its apex, now fully fractured, released its contents into the surrounding water. The organisms spread through the deep currents, carrying with them the genetic legacy of a civilization that had tried to transcend its biological limits. They were patient. They had waited 12,000 years. They could wait a little longer. The ancient builders had left a warning encoded in stone and DNA. We became gods and created monsters. We buried ourselves to save you. Do not repeat our mistakes. But humanity, like every civilization before it, believed it could control what it created. The vault was open now. The warning had been given, and the future, whatever it held, would be shaped by choices made in the depths of the ocean and in the hearts of those who refused to learn from the past. The organisms sang through the dark water, their electromagnetic voices carrying information that might be a gift or a curse, a promise or a threat. And on the surface, the world continued to turn, unaware that everything had already changed. The tide was rising, and this time there would be no burial deep enough to contain what had been released. The coffee cup trembles in my weathered hands as I speak these words for the first time in 53 years. My name is Detective Raymond Kowalski, retired SFPD, and I'm dying. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 4 if I'm lucky. But luck ran out for me the day I opened that damned Alcatraz file. They said Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers drowned in the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay on June 11th, 1962. The FBI closed the case. The warden slept easy. America's most infamous prison maintained its perfect record. But I found things I was never meant to see, things that made me understand why some truths are buried deeper than bodies. This is my confession. Not of crimes I committed, but of the crime I witnessed. The systematic erasure of 3 men who may have pulled off the impossible, only to disappear into something far worse than death. If you're listening to this recording, it means I'm gone, and maybe, just maybe, the truth can finally surface from the depths where it's been drowning all these years. It was October 1968 when Lieutenant Carson dropped the manila folder on my desk like it was radioactive. 6 years had passed since the escape, and the case was supposedly closed, filed away with all the other solved mysteries that kept the bureaucrats sleeping soundly. "Formality, Kowalski," Carson said, not meeting my eyes. "Washington wants a final review of the Alcatraz evidence. Dot the I's, cross the T's, confirm what we already know. They're fish food at the bottom of the bay." I should have known something was wrong by the way he said it. Carson was a straight shooter, the kind of cop who looked you in the eye when he talked. But that day, he stared at the wall behind me like the words might crawl off it and bite him. The file was thinner than I expected for the most famous prison break in American history. Basic escape details, witness statements from guards, the makeshift raft materials found on Angel Island. Nothing I hadn't read in the newspapers. Too clean, too neat. "Why me?" I asked. Carson finally looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. "Because you're thorough, maybe too thorough. They want this done right." He left me with those cryptic words and a growing certainty that this formality was anything but routine. I started with the obvious inconsistencies. The first was a car theft report from Marina District, filed 3 days after the escape. A 1959 Chevrolet, stolen from outside a boarding house. The owner, Mrs. Eleanor Hutchins, told police she saw 3 men walking away from the vehicle, heading toward the waterfront. When she called out to them, one turned and tipped his hat. "Polite as you please." "They had manners," she told the responding officer. "Real gentlemen. You don't expect that from criminals." The report was buried on page 47 of miscellaneous incident files. No follow-up, no investigation, no mention in the official Alcatraz case summary. Then there was the paddle, a crude wooden oar carved from driftwood, found by a fisherman near Richmond Bridge, 20 miles upriver from where the currents should have carried any debris. The fisherman, Miguel Santos, reported it to park rangers, who logged it as miscellaneous beach debris. No connection made to the escape, despite the timing and craftsmanship that clearly showed prison workshop techniques. But it was the witness statement that made my blood run cold. A night security guard at Fisherman's Wharf reported seeing 3 men in work clothes boarding a small fishing boat around 4 a.m. on June 12th. One of them had distinctive ears, prominent, almost pointed, just like John Anglin's mugshot description. The guard's statement was taken, filed, and apparently forgotten. When I tried to interview him, I learned he'd quit his job 2 weeks after the incident and moved back to Oregon. No forwarding address. "Don't dig too deep on this one, Ray," Carson warned me when I briefed him on my preliminary findings. "Some stones are better left unturned." That's when I knew I was onto something bigger than a prison break. The Anglin family farm in Ruskin, Florida felt like stepping into a different century. Spanish moss hung from ancient oaks, and the humid air carried the scent of orange blossoms and old secrets. Robert Anglin, the surviving brother, met me on the front porch with the wary eyes of a man who'd been expecting bad news for 6 years. "Federal agents been by here 4 times, he said without preamble, each time asking the same questions, getting the same answers. "My brother's drowned. That's what you want to hear, ain't it?" But his wife, Marie, had different ideas. After Robert went to tend the cattle, She pulled me aside in her kitchen, glancing nervously at the windows. "Christmas cards," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ticking grandfather clock. "Every year since '63, no return address, just signed J&C in handwriting that looks mighty familiar." She showed me a shoebox filled with holiday cards, generic drugstore variety, postmarked from different cities: San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Mexico City. The handwriting was careful, disguised, but there were telltale loops and slants that matched samples I'd obtained from the prison records. "Why haven't you told the FBI?" I asked. Marie's laugh was bitter. "You think we haven't tried? First agent said they were hoaxes. Second one confiscated them as evidence. Third one threatened to charge us with obstruction if we kept spreading false hope. These here are copies I made before they took the originals." Photographs came out next. 3 pictures, slightly blurry, showing 2 men in work shirts standing outside what appeared to be a South American cantina. The faces were partially obscured by shadows and hat brims, but the bone structure, the posture, the way one man favoured his left leg, it all matched the Anglin brothers' physical profiles. "Woman from church. Her daughter married a missionary. Sent these from Brazil in '65, Marie explained. Said these 2 Americans worked construction jobs, paid cash, kept to themselves, spoke English with Florida accents." I studied the photos with a magnifying glass. The man on the left had a distinctive scar on his forearm, a scar I remembered from Clarence Anglin's prison medical records, sustained in a workshop accident at Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. "FBI says they're look-alikes," Marie continued. "Coincidence, but a mother knows her son's detective. Even in shadows, even across oceans, those are my boys." The fear in her eyes wasn't the fear of grief or false hope. It was the fear of someone who knew more than she was saying, someone who'd been warned to keep quiet. As I left the farm that evening, I noticed a dark sedan parked down the country road, 2 figures visible in the front seats. When I drove past, they turned away, but not before I caught a glimpse of federal license plates. The Anglins were being watched. After 6 years, the dead men's family was still under surveillance. That night in my motel room, I spread out everything I'd gathered so far. The car theft, the paddle, the witness statements, the cards and photographs. Individually, they could be dismissed as coincidence or wishful thinking. Together, they painted a picture that made my hands shake as I wrote my preliminary report. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers hadn't drowned in San Francisco Bay. They'd made it to shore, stolen transportation, and somehow managed to disappear into the wind. The question that kept me awake until dawn wasn't whether they'd survived the escape. It was why the government was so determined to pretend they hadn't. The National Archives building in Washington, D.C., has the kind of institutional grandeur designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. As I walked through its marble corridors in November the 1968, carrying my credentials and a growing list of questions, I felt exactly as intended. The records clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the pallor of someone who spent his days in basement filing rooms, greeted my request with practiced bureaucratic indifference. "Alcatraz escape files? Let me check the catalogue." He disappeared into the labyrinthine storage system, returning 20 minutes later with a puzzled frown. "That's odd. The primary files show as transferred to federal custody in 1964, no longer available for review." "Transferred where?" "Doesn't say. Just lists the authorization code. Project Paperclip Archive classified." Project Paperclip. Even a street cop from San Francisco knew that designation. The program that brought Nazi scientists to America after World War II. Why would an escape case be filed under intelligence classifications? What about the secondary files, witness statements, evidence logs? Another search, another apologetic shrug. Also transferred, same authorization. I spent 3 days in Washington, following leads that turned to smoke and asking questions that generated only nervous silence. At FBI headquarters, my request for case consultation was politely denied. At the Bureau of Prisons, I was told the relevant personnel were unavailable for comment. Even my police credentials and Lieutenant Carson's authorization letters seemed to carry no weight. It was Agent Patricia Hendricks, a bureau analyst I'd worked with on a previous case, who finally gave me the truth over drinks in a Georgetown bar. She waited until we were alone, until the other patrons had cleared out, until even the bartender was busy with inventory in the back room. "Ray, you need to drop this," she said quietly, her usual professional demeanour replaced by genuine concern. "The Alcatraz case isn't cold. It's radioactive." "What does that mean?" Patricia glanced around the empty bar before continuing. Internal memo came down in 65. Any agent pursuing Alcatraz leads beyond the official drowning conclusion would be transferred to Alaska or worse. 3 agents have been quietly reassigned since then. Good agents, career agents, all because they asked too many questions about 3 supposedly dead men. Why? If they drowned like the report says, what's the threat? Her laugh was hollow. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? All I know is that certain people in very high places want Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers to stay dead, and they're willing to destroy careers to keep it that way. She slid an envelope across the table. "I couldn't get you the files, but I managed to copy some of the index pages before they were sealed. Names, dates, reference numbers. Maybe you can piece together what we're not supposed to know." The documents were fragmentary, frustratingly incomplete, but they told a story that made my blood run cold. Cross-references to CIA front companies, mentions of asset recovery protocol, transfer authorization signed by officials whose names I recognised from the intelligence community. Most disturbing was a memo dated July 1962, just 1 month after the escape. "Subjects may possess operational value. Recommend immediate field assessment rather than standard fugitive protocols." Operational value, not the language you'd use for bank robbers and car thieves. That night, in my Washington hotel room, I called Lieutenant Carson to report my findings. The conversation was brief and cryptic. "Ray, you need to come home. Now. I've got leads here, Lieutenant. Real leads. The leads will be there when you get back. If you get back. There are people asking questions about your questions, and those people have resources we don't. Come home." The line went dead. I packed quickly, checking the hallway twice before leaving my room. During the taxi ride to the airport, I noticed the same black sedan in my mirrors that had followed me from the archives building 3 days earlier. Back in San Francisco, Carson met me at the airport personally, something he'd never done before. His first words were a warning. "Your hotel room was searched yesterday. Professional job. Nothing taken, nothing damaged, but they wanted you to know they'd been there." As we drove through the city, he filled me in on developments from my end. Miguel Santos, the fisherman who found the paddle, died in a car accident outside Portland last week. Single vehicle collision on a straight road, clear weather, and Mrs. Hutchins, the lady who saw the car theft, moved to Phoenix, left no forwarding address. Her old neighbours say federal agents visited her the day before she left. The pattern was becoming clear. Anyone connected to evidence contradicting the official narrative was disappearing, voluntarily or otherwise. The Alcatraz case wasn't just closed, it was being actively suppressed by people with resources and authority I couldn't match. "What do I do, Lieutenant?" Carson pulled over and turned to face me. In 30 years of police work, I'd never seen him look so serious. "You write a report confirming the drowning theory. You file it properly. You forget everything you've learned, and you pray that's enough to keep you breathing." But I couldn't forget. The faces in those photographs. The fear in Mary Anglin's eyes. The systematic elimination of evidence and witnesses. Somewhere out there, the truth was buried so deep that powerful people were willing to destroy lives to keep it hidden. The question was whether I was brave enough, or stupid enough, to keep digging. Tony the Fish Marconi wasn't the kind of informant you'd find in a police procedural manual. A small-time smuggler with ties to both San Francisco's waterfront and various federal agencies that preferred not to be named, Tony survived by knowing when to talk and when to disappear. When he agreed to meet me at a dive bar in North Beach, I knew the information would be worth the risk. "You're playing with fire, detective," he said, stirring his whiskey with a nicotine-stained finger. "The Alcatraz thing? That ain't just a prison break, that's connected to some heavy government business." "What kind of business?" Tony glanced around the dim bar, noting the exits, the other patrons, the bartender's attention. Old habits from a life lived in the shadows. "You ever hear of something called the Prometheus Group?" I shook my head. "Private contractors, black budget operations, The kind of people who make problems disappear for Uncle Sam. Word on the street is they were running recruitment out of the Bay Area in the early 60s, looking for specific types, intelligent, adaptable, morally flexible, men who'd already proven they could operate outside the law. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You're saying Morris and the Anglins were recruited? I'm saying Morris had an IQ of 133 and a talent for planning that impressed even the prison psychologists. The Anglin brothers were mechanical geniuses who could improvise solutions from scrap metal and determination. During the Cold War, those were valuable skills. Tony drained his whiskey and signalled for another. Think about it. 3 men plan the perfect escape from America's most secure prison. They disappear without a trace, despite the biggest manhunt in federal history. Either they're criminal masterminds beyond anything we've seen, or they had help. Professional help. What kind of help? The kind that comes with new identities, transportation, and assignments in places where questions aren't asked. South America was crawling with intelligence operations in the 60s. Cuba, Chile, Brazil, all potential flashpoints that needed experienced operators who couldn't be traced back to Washington. The theory was insane, but it explained the evidence I'd uncovered. The systematic suppression of information, the classified file transfers, the fear I'd encountered at every level of government. If the Alcatraz escape had been a recruitment operation disguised as a prison break, then admitting the men survived would expose a covert program that violated everything America claimed to stand for. There's another possibility, Tony continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Maybe they weren't recruited. Maybe they stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. Such as... Alcatraz was more than a prison detective. It was a research facility, mind control experiments, interrogation techniques, pharmaceutical trials, the kind of work that required subjects who couldn't complain to their congressman. What if Morris and the Anglins saw something during their time there? What if their escape wasn't about freedom, it was about exposure? My mind reeled with the implications. If the escapees had witnessed classified experiments, their capture wouldn't result in a return to prison. It would result in permanent silence. I've heard whispers, Tony continued. Black sites in Nevada, facilities that don't appear on any government maps, places where inconvenient people go to be forgotten, the kind of places where 3 escaped prisoners might end up if they knew too much. He finished his second whiskey and stood to leave. One more thing, Detective. You know why they call it the Prometheus Group? I shook my head. Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. The gods punished him by chaining him to a rock where eagles ate his liver for eternity. Some gifts come with a price that never stops being paid. After Tony left, I sat in that dim bar for another hour, trying to process what he'd told me. 3 theories, each more disturbing than the last. Theory 1. Cold War recruitment. The escape was facilitated by intelligence agencies looking for deniable assets. Morris and the Anglins were extracted, given new identities, and deployed to international hotspots where their criminal skills could serve national interests. Theory 2. Witness protection in reverse. The men had seen classified activities at Alcatraz and escaped to avoid being silenced. Their continued existence threatened to expose government programs that officially didn't exist. Theory 3. The darkest possibility. They were captured alive after the escape and disappeared into the black site system, spending the rest of their lives as test subjects or interrogation practice for intelligence agencies that viewed them as expendable assets. Each theory explained the evidence I'd gathered. Each theory justified the extreme measures taken to suppress the truth. And each theory meant that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers faced something far worse than drowning in San Francisco Bay. They faced erasure from history itself. 6 months later, against direct orders from Lieutenant Carson and my own better judgment, I found myself on a flight to Rio de Janeiro. The lead had come through Tony Marconi's network, a bartender in Ipanema who claimed to remember 2 American men matching the Anglin's description, regulars at his establishment from 1971 to 1978. They paid cash, spoke little Portuguese, and never talked about their past, the bartender Carlos told me through a translator. But they were different from other expatriates, more careful, always watching the exits, never sitting with their backs to the door. The description matched surveillance training, the kind of operational security taught to intelligence assets. Carlos produced a photograph taken during a Christmas party in 1975. A grainy image showing two men at the edge of the celebration, their faces partially obscured but their body language unmistakably American. My hands trembled as I studied the picture. The man on the left had the same jawline, the same ears, the same way of holding his shoulders that I'd memorised from Clarence Anglin's prison files. The other figure showed signs of premature ageing, stress lines and grey hair that suggested a life lived under constant tension. "What happened to them?" I asked. Carlos's expression darkened. "They left suddenly, in the middle of the night. One day they were here. The next day their apartment was empty. The landlord said men in suits had come asking questions the week before. Americans, but not tourists. Government men." I spent another week in Rio following leads that grew colder with each passing day. The apartment building where the mystery Americans had lived was scheduled for demolition, its records mysteriously lost in a fire. The bank where they had allegedly maintained accounts had no record of American customers from that period. Every trail ended in convenient dead ends and missing documentation. On my final night in Brazil, I was approached by a man claiming to be a freelance journalist who'd been investigating the same story. We met at a beachside cafe in Copacabana, the sound of waves masking our conversation from potential surveillance. "You're the American detective asking about the Alcatraz escapees," he said without preamble. It wasn't a question. I neither confirmed nor denied, waiting for him to continue. "I've been working this story for 3 years," he said, "following reports of American fugitives throughout South America. The trail is real, detective, too real. These men lived here, worked here, built lives here. But every time I get close to proof, the sources disappear, witnesses relocate, documents vanish. I've had my hotel room searched, my phone tapped, my sources intimidated." He slid a manila envelope across the table. "This is everything I've gathered. Photographs, witness statements, financial records, hidden in different locations for 3 years, copied and recopied to prevent loss. It's yours now." "Why?" "Because I'm done." Yesterday, I received a visit from 2 men with American accents and no identification. They politely suggested that my investigation was endangering people I cared about. They showed me photographs of my sister's children playing in a park in Sao Paulo. Very clear photographs. Very recent photographs. The envelope contained a treasure trove of evidence. Bank records showing regular deposits to accounts held by men with obviously false Brazilian identities. Employment records from construction companies that had hired American workers without proper documentation. Hotel registries with signatures that bore striking resemblances to handwriting samples I'd obtained from Alcatraz. Most compelling was a photograph dated 1976 showing 3 men at a construction site in the Amazon basin. 2 matched the Anglin brothers' physical descriptions. The third was older, lean, with the kind of penetrating stare I remembered from Frank Morris's mugshot. All 3 wore work clothes and hard hats, looking like ordinary labourers except for their distinctly American postures and expressions. But like every other lead I'd followed, this one ended in frustration and fear. When I tried to contact the construction company, I learned it had been dissolved in 1979. The site where the photograph was taken was now underwater, flooded by a dam project that had relocated the entire local population. The pattern was always the same. Evidence of survival followed by systematic elimination of that evidence. Either I was chasing ghosts or someone with vast resources was staying one step ahead of every investigation. My flight back to San Francisco was delayed by mysterious mechanical problems. During the 6-hour layover in Mexico City, I noticed the same 2 men in different locations throughout the terminal. Always at a distance, always watching, never making direct contact. When I finally boarded the plane, they weren't among the passengers. Lieutenant Carson met me at San Francisco International with news that made my blood run cold. "Federal marshals raided your apartment yesterday, Ray. Warrant signed by a judge I've never heard of, for evidence in a case they wouldn't specify. They took everything, your files, your notes, your photographs, everything connected to Alcatraz." In the car ride home, he handed me an official-looking document. Transfer orders, effective immediately. You're being reassigned to the robbery division. Your Alcatraz investigation is officially terminated. On whose authority? Authority high enough that questioning it would end both our careers. Carson's voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. Ray, I've been a cop for 28 years. I've seen corruption, cover-ups and conspiracies, but I've never seen anything like this. The pressure to shut you down is coming from levels of government I didn't know existed. He pulled over in a secluded area of Golden Gate Park and turned to face me directly. Whatever you found down there, whatever you think you know, it's not worth your life. These people have made careers disappear for asking the wrong questions. They can make people disappear too. As he spoke, a black sedan with government plates drove slowly past us, its occupants clearly visible through tinted windows that somehow allowed us to see their faces while hiding their expressions. The message was unmistakable. We were being watched, our conversation monitored, our future actions carefully noted. That night, alone in my ransacked apartment, I realised the full scope of what I was up against. This wasn't just a cover-up of a prison escape. It was the systematic suppression of a truth so dangerous that the most powerful government in the world was willing to destroy lives to protect it. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers hadn't just escaped from Alcatraz. They'd escaped into a shadow world where truth became enemy of the state, where survival meant accepting lies, and where the greatest prison of all was the silence that surrounded their fate. But silence, I was beginning to understand, has its own way of speaking to those willing to listen. 25 years passed like pages torn from a calendar and scattered by the wind. I worked robbery division, collected my pension, and tried to convince myself that some truths were better left buried. The Alcatraz case became a ghost that haunted my dreams, 3 faces staring at me from the depths of San Francisco Bay, asking why I'd abandoned the search for their story. Then came January 2013, and a letter that changed everything. The History Channel documentary was running old Alcatraz footage when the phone rang. It was my former partner, Jimmy Chen, now working cold cases for the FBI. His voice carried the excitement of a man who'd stumbled onto something extraordinary. Ray, you need to see this. Someone sent a letter to the Bureau claiming to be John Anglin. Says he's dying of cancer, wants to make a deal. Information about the escape in exchange for medical treatment. My hands shook as I read the photocopied letter Jimmy brought to my house that evening. The handwriting was shaky with age and illness, but certain flourishes matched the Christmas cards Marie Anglin had shown me decades earlier. The details were specific, accurate, insider knowledge that only someone who'd lived through the escape could possess. It's a hoax, Jimmy said, watching my reaction. Has to be. FBI handwriting analysis says inconclusive. Could be authentic, could be someone who studied the case extensively. But I knew better. The letter wasn't just about the escape. It mentioned details that had never been made public. References to guard rotation patterns that were classified. Descriptions of cell modifications that weren't in any official report. Knowledge that could only come from someone who'd been there, who'd lived through those final months of preparation. There's more, Jimmy continued. The letter mentions a meeting place, coordinates in the Bay Area, where supposedly Frank Morris left something hidden before the escape. Information that was too dangerous to carry. The writer claims it's still there, waiting for someone brave enough to look. The coordinates led to a section of Angel Island State Park, near the spot where the makeshift raft materials had been found 51 years earlier. Against every instinct for self-preservation I'd developed, I found myself hiking those trails the following weekend, searching for something I couldn't name. It was hidden in a cave that didn't appear on any park maps, sealed behind rocks that looked natural but showed tool marks when examined closely. A waterproof container, military surplus from the 1960s, containing documents that made my blood run cold. Guard schedules from Alcatraz, annotated with personal notes about corruption and smuggling operations. Photographs of prison officials meeting with men in expensive suits who didn't appear in any government directories. Financial records showing payments from offshore accounts to wardens and guards who lived far beyond their official salaries. Most damning was a handwritten journal in Frank Morris's distinctive script, documenting what he'd witnessed during his time at Alcatraz. The prison wasn't just housing criminals, it was housing witnesses to government activities that violated constitutional protections, political prisoners who'd been disappeared from the mainland, foreign nationals being held without diplomatic notification, test subjects for psychological experiments that would later be revealed as part of the MKUltra program. The final entry, dated 2 days before the escape, was prophetic in its certainty. We're not breaking out to be free, we're breaking out to stay alive. What we know, what we've seen, makes us more dangerous to them than any criminal they've ever housed. If we stay, we disappear quietly. If we escape and get caught, we disappear loudly. Our only chance is to vanish completely and hope the truth survives us. The documents explained everything. The official insistence on the drowning theory, the suppression of evidence, the systematic elimination of witnesses. The Alcatraz escape wasn't a crime to be solved. It was a national security incident to be contained. Morris and the Anglins hadn't just witnessed classified activities. They documented them, created a record of government crimes that could destroy careers and topple administrations. Their escape was both an act of desperation and a gamble that someday someone would be brave enough to tell their story. Reading those pages in the dim light of that hidden cave, I finally understood the true scope of the self-destruction paradox. The very actions taken to hide the truth had preserved it. The efforts to silence witnesses had created evidence. The attempts to erase history had documented it in detail. But understanding the truth and proving it were different challenges entirely. The men who'd orchestrated the cover-up were dead or retired, their crimes protected by classification systems and institutional amnesia. The witnesses were gone, scattered or silenced by 5 decades of systematic intimidation. Yet the letter kept haunting me. Someone claiming to be John Anglin, dying and desperate, reaching out across 50 years of silence to offer one final revelation. The FBI had dismissed it as a hoax, but their dismissal felt too quick, too certain, too reminiscent of the patterns I'd seen decades earlier. Late at night, when the pain in my chest reminded me of my own mortality, I wondered about the fates of 3 men who'd gambled everything on an impossible escape. Had they found freedom in the jungles of South America? Had they lived out their days under assumed names, carrying secrets too dangerous to share? Or had they been caught, disappeared into black sites where their knowledge died with them? The letter writer claimed John Anglin had survived into the 21st century, living with the weight of knowledge that could never be shared, watching as history branded him a criminal, while the real criminals wore badges and held office. If true, it was a torture more cruel than any prison cell, to know the truth and be unable to speak it, to carry justice in your heart while injustice wore your name. I kept the documents for 6 months before making my decision. They couldn't stay hidden. Too many people had died to protect these secrets, and too many others deserved to know the truth. But releasing them publicly would accomplish nothing except getting me killed and the evidence destroyed. Instead, I chose a different path. I copied everything, hid the copies in locations scattered across the country, and left instructions for their release upon my death. If the government wanted to suppress the truth, they'd have to do it posthumously, when I could no longer be intimidated or eliminated. The original documents I returned to their hiding place on Angel Island, along with my own written account of the investigation. Future generations might find them, might understand what they represented, might finally give Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers the justice they'd been denied for over half a century. But justice, I was learning, was a luxury the living could rarely afford. It was a gift we could only leave for the dead, a truth we could only speak when our own voices had been silenced. The morphine makes it difficult to focus, but I need to finish this recording while I still can. The doctors say hours now, maybe a day if I'm stubborn enough to fight the inevitable. I've been fighting for 78 years. What's one more battle against the darkness? I've spent 53 years carrying the weight of what I learned about Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. 53 years of waking up in cold sweats, wondering if today would be the day federal agents knocked on my door with a permanent solution to my inconvenient knowledge. 53 years of looking over my shoulder, checking my rearview mirror, and jumping at unexpected phone calls. The truth is a heavy burden when you're carrying it alone. I don't know if Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers lived out their days in Brazilian freedom, sipping caipirinhas on Ipanema Beach and laughing at the federal agents who'd spent decades searching for their corpses. I don't know if they died namelessly in some government facility, their final words lost in soundproof rooms designed to swallow screams. But I do know this with absolute certainty. They didn't drown in San Francisco Bay on June 11th, 1962. The evidence was always there for anyone brave enough to look past the official narrative. The car theft, the witness statements, the photographs from South America, the Christmas cards signed with familiar initials, each piece individually dismissed as coincidence or hoax, but collectively forming a picture of survival that powerful people needed to deny. The government's insistence on the drowning theory wasn't about maintaining Alcatraz's reputation or protecting prison security. It was about hiding activities that violated every principle America claimed to represent. The research programs, the intelligence operations, the systematic elimination of witnesses, all of it justified by national security classifications that turned constitutional protections into classified waste paper. Morris and the Anglins weren't just criminals who pulled off the perfect escape. They were inconvenient witnesses to state-sanctioned crimes, men whose continued existence threatened to expose a shadow government that operated beyond law, beyond oversight, beyond accountability. Their escape became their crime, their knowledge became their death sentence, their survival became a national security threat that required decades of cover-ups, intimidation, and murder to contain. I've left evidence of everything I'd discovered, hidden in multiple locations protected by legal arrangements that will trigger automatic release upon my death. Some truths are too important to die with the men who discover them. The morphine is winning now, and the room is getting darker. But before I fade away, I want to leave you with this final thought. Alcatraz was never escape-proof because its walls were too high or its waters too cold. It was escape-proof because the government made survival more dangerous than imprisonment, freedom more terrifying than captivity. The greatest prison isn't built with stone and steel. It's built with silence and fear, with official denials and convenient accidents, with careers destroyed and witnesses disappeared. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers didn't die in San Francisco Bay. The Bay didn't kill them. The silence did. And silence. Silence is the strongest prison of all. But even silence eventually comes to an end. Recording ends with the sound of steady breathing that gradually grows fainter, until only the mechanical hum of hospital equipment remains. Found among Detective Raymond Kowalski's personal effects, along with detailed instructions for the release of sealed documents and recordings. To whoever finds this recording and follows the trail I've left behind, my name was Detective Raymond Kowalski, badge number 2847, San Francisco Police Department. I died on December 20th, 2021, at 3:17 a.m., alone except for the ghosts of 3 men whose story I spent a lifetime trying to tell. If you're reading this, it means the legal mechanisms I put in place have been triggered. Safety deposit boxes in 7 different states will have been opened. Law offices in 4 different cities will have released sealed documents. Digital files stored in multiple secure locations will have been automatically transmitted to journalists, historians, and government oversight committees. I've spent 53 years preparing for this moment, the moment when my voice could finally break the silence that has protected one of the greatest cover-ups in American history. The documents you now have access to represent only a fraction of what was hidden. For every piece of evidence I managed to preserve, dozens more were destroyed by people who understood that truth was their greatest enemy. But what remains is enough. Enough to prove that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers survived their escape from Alcatraz. Enough to demonstrate the systematic suppression of evidence by multiple government agencies. Enough to show that the official narrative was a carefully constructed lie designed to protect state secrets more valuable than human lives. I need you to understand something. The men who orchestrated this cover-up weren't comic book villains twirling their mustaches in shadowy rooms. They were patriots in their own minds. They believed that protecting classified operations was more important than acknowledging 3 escaped prisoners. They convinced themselves that national security justified any level of deception, any amount of witness intimidation, any degree of evidence suppression. They were wrong. In a democracy, truth cannot be classified indefinitely. Justice cannot be postponed forever. The families of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers deserve to know their fates. The American people deserve to know what their government did in their name. History deserved an accurate record, not a convenient fiction. I've carried this burden alone because I was afraid of losing my pension, my reputation, my life, afraid of being dismissed as a conspiracy theorist or a disgruntled cop, afraid that speaking the truth would accomplish nothing except getting me killed. But fear, I've learned, is just another form of prison, and like Alcatraz itself, it's only escape-proof, as long as you believe the walls are stronger than your determination to break free. To the families of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, your loved ones were not the criminals history has made them out to be. They were witnesses to government crimes who paid the ultimate price for their knowledge. Whether they found freedom in South America or died in government custody, they deserved better than 50 years of official denial and systematic character assassination. To the government officials who will undoubtedly attempt to discredit these revelations, your time is over. The men who created this cover-up are dead. The operations they were protecting have been declassified or exposed through other channels. The only thing your continued denials accomplish is further damage to public trust in institutions that have already lost too much credibility. To the historians and journalists who will investigate these claims, be careful, be thorough, be brave. The people who killed witnesses and destroyed evidence may be gone, but the systems they created to protect state secrets remain in place. Truth-telling is still a dangerous profession in America. To Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, wherever your final resting places may be, your story is finally being told. Your truth is finally being spoken. Your silence is finally being broken. You escaped from Alcatraz on June 11th, 1962. You survived the waters of San Francisco Bay. You lived beyond that night, whatever your ultimate fates may have been. History will remember you not as the criminals who failed to escape, but as the men who succeeded too well for the government's comfort. Your greatest escape wasn't from prison. It was from the official narrative that tried to erase you from history. That escape, at least, was permanent. Final statement for the record. I, Detective Raymond Kowalski, being of sound mind and facing imminent death, do hereby swear under oath that every statement in this recording and its accompanying documents represents the truth as I discovered it through my official investigation into the Alcatraz escape of 1962. I have knowingly risked my career, my safety, and my life to preserve this information. I have done so not for personal gain or professional advancement, but because I believe that in a democracy, truth belongs to the people, not to the bureaucrats who find it inconvenient. If my death occurs under suspicious circumstances, if these documents are somehow suppressed or discredited, if this recording mysteriously disappears, let it stand as evidence that the cover-up I've documented continues to claim lives. But if this message reaches you intact, if the truth I've preserved finally sees daylight, then maybe, just maybe, the strongest prison of all has finally been breached. The silence is broken, the truth is free, and Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers can finally rest in peace, knowing their story has been told. Badge 2847, signing off for the final time.